Hello, everyone. My name is Varun Karathala, and today I'll be talking about the commercial advances during the later Middle Ages, some of the innovations that we're going to be discussing here today. Very, very influential during this period, very, very influential through the wide expanse of world history and modern. So these are very, very important things that you need to know. So, who am I? I'm a lifelong learner and a lover of the humanities. I love world history. That is my jam. I'm a sophomore in high school from Georgia, and I took the AP World History course last year. Obviously, I loved it very, very much. And I scored a 5 on the 2019 AP World History exam. So, again, this is my jam. I love doing it. I got a 790 out of 800 on the 2019 SAT subject test in world history. And if you don't know what that is, it's like more like the AP exam, except more fact-based instead of stimulus-based. So again, I love being here, being able to tutor y'all, help y'all in whatever y'all guys are dealing with. So without further ado, let's begin our stream. So first of all, what is Fiveable? And many of y'all might be a little familiar with Twitch. And Twitch is like a stream platform for gamers. And gamers can really connect with their viewers, and it's seamless streamer-to-viewer interactions and communications. We have end-to-end interaction and learning. But with Fiveable, we try to really emulate this setting, and we try to emulate the classroom setting. We have interactivity between communicators and students from across the nation, and we have learner inclusion across partisan boundaries, across classroom boundaries. So we really try to emulate the classroom setting, and we really try to inform your learning, improve your learning, and really improve your comprehension as much as possible. And a lot of us here at Fiveable like to say that if you use Fiveable, it's almost like a supplement to in-class learning. You can learn as much as you can from in-class as you can from Fiveable. So definitely stay committed to the grind, commit to Fiveable. We can teach you so much by being a member here. So first of all, we offer a freemium model with our membership, and we charge $0. It's free for you to watch any of our streams while they're live. But if you pay $5 a month for our Fiveable membership, Fiveable Plus application, you can view our library of documents and past streams. For example, I did a stream on study skills with Scholar Walters a few weeks ago. Now, for example, if you're on the West Coast, you can't view this stream because it's geared towards East Coast viewers. You may be able to go into our library of streams if you pay our $5 membership fee. So it's a very, very influential thing that you can do, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who would like doing that. And I see Allie just popped in. Hey, Allie. Okay. So coming soon, some extra streams. We have on September 29th, we have Taking Notes from Lectures with myself and Jamal Willis at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This is a great stream for anybody who wants to improve their study skills, boost their comprehension, and to really get on the good side of AP World History and Modern. At 6 p.m. EDT, that's once again. And then on September 30th, Trans-Saharan Exchange Networks with Donald D'Orto at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'll be kind of discussing this at the end of today's stream a little bit, but not in depth. Mr. D'Orto will be a great resource for you to kind of get some in-depth analysis with regard to the Trans-Saharan trade routes. And then we also have on October 1st, Indian Ocean Exchange Networks with Patrick Lassiter at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, if y'all know Mr. Lassiter, he does YouTube videos. He does a lot of informative sessions with us here at Fiveable. So definitely tune into the stream. Using both streams in conjunction with my stream would be, a supplement, a boost to your AP World History curriculum. I would highly, highly recommend it. So make sure to pop into that 8 p.m. Eastern Time on October 1st. And for your convenience, I think I put a call to action on the bottom, which states the Trans-Saharan Exchange Networks link. So if you click that, it should say Trans-Saharan Trade Networks. So if you click that, you should be able to view any of our streams in that stream in particular. All right. So in this stream, what are we going to kind of be going over in this stream with regard to innovations in the commercial period? So first, some background. We'll be talking about what were the post-classical period, what kind of did this period and its innovations entail, and the development of a merchant class in full, because we can't really talk about the commercial period without merchants, who didn't really start forming until this post-classical period, especially in the Western European realm. Then we'll talk about some general commercial innovations during the post-classical period. And then the Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan, Mediterranean, Silk Road trade routes, a very, very brief overview. Again, if you want to view any of these trade routes in depth, I would recommend going to Donald D'Orto's stream or Patrick Lassiter's stream in a few days from now. And after that, we'll be kind of having a discussion about the long-term impacts, long-standing impact of the commercial period and these innovations, and a question and answer period where you guys can ask me any other questions that you guys have about this period. So let's begin on some background about the commercial age. So After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the worldwide classical age, which you may have discussed in Unit 0 from 600 BCE to 600 CE, ceased in Europe. And because of this, we see a huge power gap, which the Roman Catholic Church of the RCC in Western Europe starts to fill. And because of this power gap, the Roman Catholic Church gains a huge dominion over merchandise, over trade, over many things in this period. We also see the growth of nation states. As you'll see later, the Western European realm after the Roman Empire began to fragment out into different nation states, which were regionally, ethnically, and religiously, for the most part, unified, which create a lot of cohesion and the ability to put out mass long-term, long-standing trade. And during the feudal period, a rigid class structure was instituted and religion was paramount. As I said, again, we have the feudal period, which has a huge class structure with serfs or peasants at the bottom. We have kings at the top who kind of relegate their land towards other laborers, other lords, and things like that. It's just a huge real estate system from top to down. And we also see religion get a paramount role in this society because, again, both these things start to form because there's a huge labor need, a huge power decrease. It's all a result of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, as we'll discuss in a few moments. So in 410 CE, the Visigoths, which is a group of nomadic Goths, sacked Rome, ending their centuries-long dominion over Western Europe. Again, you have to know that Western Rome, Rome itself, had a huge dominion over Europe. They were kind of the middlemen in Europe. They were the church before the church even happened. So, that's kind of it. And then afterwards, the Western Roman Empire, as I said before, fragmented into a series of individual nation states or Germanic states, which were connected religiously, culturally, ethnically, and in many ways. And then again, taking advantage of Europe's incohesion during the post-classical period, the Roman Catholic Church united Western Europe under a common flag, and that is the Christian flag. So for the most part, people in Western Europe were Christian. And this ideology, this religious cult, it really took a dominion over this period. As we'll see, they banned the trade, they banned money lending through usury. So a lot of the things that happened were a result of this, of this entity. It wasn't really an empire, but it was the biggest that you can get to it. Again, we talk about the Crusades. This is a very overbearing thing. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church was extremely influential. So, the development of a merchant class. So long-distance trade was back and better during the post-classical period because it piggybacked off the development and advancement of long-standing trade routes by willful Chinese dynasty, the Mongol Khanates, and/or the Islamic Caliphates. What I mean by this is after the Roman Empire fell, the Mongol Khanates, the Chinese dynasties, and the Islamic Caliphates we'll talk about later really gained an influence over post-classical trade and post-classical regional identities. And so these empires really facilitated trade along trade routes like the Silk Roads, the Trans-Saharan trade routes, the Mediterranean trade routes. They really regulated this trade and made it that all traders were protected by the Sharia law or the Ummah law, as we'll talk about in a few moments. Okay, so Ali just asked, can you describe the Mongol Khanates? So what I know from my experiences in world history was when Genghis Khan died, there was a huge power gap in the Mongol Empire. And so even though Kublai Khan was appointed as the next Khan, this power gap was still apparent. So what Kublai did to kind of fill this power gap is to divide the Mongol Empire into multiple Khanates. And if my memory, yes, I know this. So the Yuan Empire was the Khanate in China. And for example, it was a very influential Khanate from which Genghis Khan's successor, Kublai Khan, ruled. And so there was that Khanate. There was a Khanate in Russia, for example. There was a Khanate that was called the Il Khanate in Middle East. So every region that the Mongols had, Ali, they kind of delegated Khanates to this region. So it was kind of a means of controlling the empire after the death of Genghis Khan. Because, for example, Alexander the Great's empire in the classical period, when Alexander the Great died, his empire was completely demolished. I mean, nobody was there to control it, and it was divided into a series of non-unified states. But the Mongol Khanates were very unified. They were culturally unified, they were ethnically unified, and they were ruled by common control. Kublai Khan, the rule of the Il Khanate, and the other rulers were all united under a culture, and they frequently communicated. And so to put it short, it was just a means of dividing power during this period. If I made that clear enough, if I went too fast, let me know. I can describe some other specific things about that. So just let me know. Okay, I'm here for y'all. All right. So as the feudal hierarchy began to take shape, feudal lords and wealthy nobles began to desire objects to display their societal standing. And what I mean by this is that these feudal lords really wanted something to display how much wealth that they had. And again, we're talking about the feudal compromise here. We had, first of all, the kings. Okay, these kings were at the top, and then we have the lords, who were a little bit, they delegated land from the kings, and then they delegated land to their knights, and then the laborers. And so that was kind of the societal standing here. And these lords, they were constantly vying for power, and they wanted to desire social standing. They wanted to desire wealth. And so because of these innate desires, they wanted to get some Chinese silks and Indian spices, which during this period, I mean, now we think of them as clothes and food condiments. But back then, they were an example of being wealthy, being rich. And so that was a really, really important thing to them. And because of their desire to kind of take these things, they went to places like Asia, they went to places like Europe, and they went and they traded with these empires. And so the feudal period and the feudal system, it really contributed to the development of a merchant class, if you think about it. And then, again, as we'll talk about, later expeditions of Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo spurred interest in the East. So the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, these were ethnically Muslim caliphates. I mean, again, we're talking about Islam. Muhammad the Prophet, who was, the first person who introduced Islam to the modern world, Muhammad the Prophet was a merchant. And so under Sharia law, which is basically a law code that they followed, mercantile practices were very, very honorable, which we'll see a sharp contrast with the practice of usury by the Roman Catholic Church in a few slides here. Also, they had trade contacts with China, India, and Africa. They were all over the place, the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates. They adopted and improved maritime technology and rectified existing routes, much like the Mediterranean Empire, the Roman Catholic Church during this period. So the Mongol Khanates, again, now there's a few more points about the Mongol Khanates. They formed to control the vast Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan's death, as I explained. And also they promoted interregional commerce and cultural diffusion, especially on these Silk Roads. So one thing to know about the Mongol Khanates and Kublai Khan is he loved trade. I mean, we're talking about Marco Polo. Marco Polo was a guy who Kublai Khan loved. They were like brothers, almost. And he accepted him. And so they promoted interregional commerce and cultural diffusion. They protected people on the Silk Roads. They protected merchants. And we know the Mongol Empire to be a really, really bad, the big bad wolf in this realm. I mean, they killed people, they raped people. But if you think about it, they did really spur cultural diffusion because they protected the people that were merchants. They protected the landowners, and that was their role. Also, Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan were both religiously, they were open-minded. And so Genghis Khan, one of his famous quotes was, he liked all the religions of the book. He liked Judaism, he liked Christianity, and he liked Islam. So all these religions made a huge, huge impact on him, and he promoted interregional cultural diffusion as well as Kublai Khan did after him. And then again, Ibn Battuta, he was a predecessor of Marco Polo, and he made a huge 24-year journey across the world during his Hajj, which again, a Hajj is an Islamic term. It is the journey from one's place of birth to Mecca, and it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So, yeah. And then Marco Polo. So Marco Polo was a Venetian trader who eventually made this travel across the world, just like Ibn Battuta. And so he was very, very influential, especially when he went to the Mongol Khanates. Kublai Khan loved him. And so it was a very, very good thing for the mercantile class. So the development of a merchant class, and this really is restricted to Europe. I'm not really talking about the Asians or the Africans right now, especially if you want to know about them or you haven't learned that in class yet. Ask me a question, I'll find out for you, or if I don't know already. So development of a merchant class. From the early period of Christianity to the later 15th century, the Roman Catholic Church continued to shun the practice of usury. And what usury was money lending. And so they really didn't like this practice. As you can see in this picture over here, we have Jesus Christ telling all these people, we don't want you guys to steal our money. Because again, this was a sin. They thought that usury or money lending was a sin. It wasn't an honorable practice during this period. So they kind of hated it. They really hated it. And it was a sin to do so. Though the RCC strict code versus money lending played a role in decreasing the overall class divide in early society, it contributed to a disadvantage in commercial practices. So again, we're talking about they didn't like this practice. It created a less class divide. Even though we had feudalism going on, there was less of a class divide because of this practice than in Islamic society, because these debtors weren't kind of subsidiaries to their overlords and things like that. In the late 15th century, monarchs, politicians, and businessmen, these 3 people, monarchs, politicians, and businessmen, began to turn the tide upon their policies because they didn't want to be restricted by trade. They didn't want to be restricted by the Roman Catholic Church. And so they further normalized money lending and financed the creation of banks, and the RCC followed suit. So these kings, they created banks intentionally to spur trade in spite of their laws against usury. And again, the RCC followed suit. They implemented some measures to kind of accept this society, to accept this newly formed dominion of the kings. So you can see this graphic down here before the 1450s. These moneylenders were even lower than the farmers. They were almost like untouchables in India. They didn't really have a role in society. If they did, it was a bad role. And then, so these moneylenders were under the farmers, the warriors, and especially the kings. And after 1450 CE, we again see them rise because all these monarchs, politicians, and businessmen began to shun the practice of usury. They shun the practice of banning usury, and they start to accept money lending into their society. We have the creation of national banks. Farmers are at the bottom once again. These peasants, these warriors are third in the row, and money lending, banking, and business becomes a very, very influential profession and a sought-after professions to have during this period. So before we talk about general commercial innovations during the post-classical period, can any of you name some commercial innovations from your class or independent studies? We have a lot here, but any you can name? Any commercial innovations that you can name from the post-classical period? Like, right, for example, right here we have DAOs and junks. We have the Hanseatic League or trading guilds. We have state-sponsored trade, bills of exchange. Any technologies that we have during this period, if you want to name some. We have currency, papermaking. Yes, that was very, very influential during this period because with papermaking, especially with Johannes Gutenberg, who made the printing press, and the early Chinese papermaking, we see the influential rule of currency. Woodblock printing, exactly. Chinese used woodblock printing. So it allowed for currency to start to form during this period. It allowed for people to have a more uniform way to trade goods, and it was very, very influential, especially for commercial advantage. So any other things you have to say, make sure to leave in the comment section. I like those. Thank you, Ali. Porcelain. Yes, that wasn't necessarily commercial innovation, but it was something they traded. Again, we're talking about the lords, the kings. They love this luxury goods. And especially when porcelain, it's kind of a practical thing now. But back then, it was very, very expensive. And they liked expensive things. So again, porcelain wasn't necessarily commercial innovation, but it did spur trade because it made people want to go from the east to the west and back and forth. All right, so let's move on to these commercial innovations that I have on the board. So some general commercial innovations for you to know. We have dhows and junks. And dhows were ships made by the Islamic empires, like the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And they kind of had a curved bottom, and they really were swift, hefty ships that allowed for long-term maritime travel. And so were the junks. The junks were also ships much like the dhows, but were much, a little bit bulkier. They were made by the Chinese, and they spurred trade. They spurred cultural exchange through commercial conquests and commercial bouts. So know the names dhows and junks. Don't know too much about them, but do know they're swift and hefty ships that they use to travel. We also have guilds. Guilds are kind of merchant communities because, again, as we stated, after 1470, the practice of usury was, not banned, and so mercantile communities began to form across Europe. And so trading guilds were mercantile communities that began to band together for the common defense and fair trade. For example, one of the great examples that might appear on the AP examination for you guys is the Hanseatic League. And the Hanseatic League formed during this period, and that's kind of a very, very influential guild where many, many states in Europe began to band together and to really, really trade within one another. They had a common currency. They had equal and fair trade regulations. So the guilds were created to regulate trade in a fair form and not have really high prices or really, really abnormally strict people. We also have state-issued currency. Again, as you were stating here above, the Hanseatic League. It's on here. Hanseatic. All right. So, yep. So we also have state-issued currency. So again, as Ali was stating, we have the formation of paper and paper currency. So this currency allowed for a common medium of exchange across national boundaries as mandated by the government. And so it was very influential during this period because, again, we can't have different currencies and people have so much cohesion without a state-issued currency, if you know what I mean. And so, for example, down here, it's one of the main currencies that they use in the Chinese dynasties. And so this allowed for people to kind of trade with a common currency, a common route of exchange, and for anybody, even peasants, farmers, businessmen, to talk and exchange things. We also have bills of exchange. And the main thing that, merchants were kind of worried about when they're traveling across land is their money getting stolen. Because they have these huge sacks, I'm using a metaphor right here, but huge sacks of coins, of silver coins, and there's bandits on these routes, especially on places like the Silk Road, these overland routes, and there's bandits, there's pirates in the Mediterranean routes. So these checks were used by merchants to facilitate safe travels over land. So, for example, I could go in, I could take this check or these bills of exchange, and I could trade them in for goods. And these people can come down to my intermediary and ask for the money back from there. And I keep it in a bank. So it's very, very influential. We use checks today. It's a very, very influential thing that continues to this day, and it's not something to take lightly. We also have state-sponsored trade, and many states want to protect national interests through exports and to push forth interregional connections. For that result, rulers sponsored trade and colonization. So rulers really sponsored trade in two ways. They had currency, and they sponsored innovations in commercial technology. And so they sponsored map making. They sponsored things like the building of dhows and junks. And so they sponsored these merchants like Christopher Columbus later on, or Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta. So these people are really subsidized by these states for their travels and their studies in this field. So new maritime technologies are rising during the period from 1200 CE to 1450 CE. So first we have the stern post rudder. It was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, and it allowed for European sailors to gain better control over their ships. And if you can see this image over here, we have a short image, a red image of the stern post rudder. And so it was this little thing in the front of the ship which allowed for better control. It was, very, very influential, formed contemporarily with the wheel. And so both of these things really formed control over ships, and these sailors could really, really take control of their voyages. We also have the magnetic compass, which was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, which allowed sailors to determine the direction without land. And before the magnetic compass, people had to look at land to determine where they were, because they really had no idea except for the astrolabe. But the magnetic compass was a much easier tool, which allowed sailors to determine their direction. And it was very, very influential. I mean, it continued. Many of these things were. I'm not saying that, but they were very, very used even today. We see a compass. The first thing I got for my first birthday was a compass. We have Mesoamerican trade routes, because it's not in Eurasia. This is something I wanted to mention just because I was talking a lot about Eurasia during this period. Mesoamerican trade routes really began to flourish during this period, spanning thousands of miles, especially during the reign of the Incan Empire. The Incan Empire had huge trade routes, which allowed for cultural diffusion, commercial innovations, and trade, beyond regional boundaries. We also have the lateen sail, which was invented during the Roman Empire and allowed Europeans to take advantage of the wind. Now, before they had to row these boats and do stuff like that, but the lateen sail allowed them to really take advantage of the wind and use this wind power to kind of power their own ships. It's a lot like the windmills in today's world. We didn't really know that we could harness the power of the winds until these windmills, and these windmills allowed for us to take control of the wind and to use it in our everyday bouts. And that was the influence of the lateen sail. Again, like the stern post rudder and the wheel, it allowed for much, much better control over anybody's ships. And we also have the astrolabe, which developed in the Western European realm and allowed for celestial navigation based on the sun and other stars. So much like the magnetic compass, it allowed for navigation without having to look at land or without having to look at maps. Of course, you had to look at maps, but it was a much, much easier, faster, and more efficient way of doing so. And lastly, we have new ideological concepts arriving during the period from 1200 CE to 1450 CE. And in my view, guilds and state-sponsored trade also fall under this, but some things that specifically fall under this are flying money, which again, like these bills of exchange, were special documents that allowed Chinese merchants to pay using slips of paper versus coins. And this cool emoji, it really represents flying money, because they carried this money without having to carry so many coins in their back, which was tedious, it was dangerous, and it's also very, very non-effective when you're going to negotiate trade contracts. We also have intense colonization, and interregional diplomacy were used to negotiate trading deals with an empire. So we see later on the Tang Dynasty, the Song Dynasty, and the Portuguese Empire try to colonize places, try to form trading post empires, cross places, and that's kind of an ideological concept that derives during this period, and to really, really, really spur trade, spur innovation, and spur cultural exchanges. And then we also have theological interactions. And again, we're seeing the universal growth of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, not so much, but Buddhism and Hinduism. Theological interaction helps connect regional identities. And so because of so much religious diffusion, religious interactions, people from different places were kind of unified under a single flag. Again, as we're saying, in the Western European realm, the Roman Catholic Church really unified everyone. And it was like the medium of power during this period. All right, and before we move on, I see a comment by Eric Beckman. He said, just leaving this evidence of American exchange here. HTTPS smarthistory.org, double-headed serpent. Yep. Oh, I'll even direct you to this one. Yeah, I'll give you this one. So let me switch over to that, because I think that's a great piece of evidence. 1 second. All right, let's share the screen here. And thank you, Mr. Beckman. Here we go. So this is really an example of cultural diffusion, as you can see. This is an Aztec, a double-headed serpent. So this came up to Britain. It came up to them, obviously, and it was a very, very influential piece of art during this period. As you can see, it's a mosaic, and so this is kind of an example of cultural diffusion before we move on, which was a really influential thing even to this day. All right. So now we're going to talk about some influential trade routes, kind of a brief overview. Can anybody name any other trade routes other than the Indian Ocean trade route? There are 4, that's a hint, that are very popular, that is. All right. All right, 1 more second, or 10 more seconds. We'll see how this goes. If y'all don't know, it's okay. I mean, take a guess. Anything, works. All right, so yeah, we'll talk about all of them: the Indian Ocean trade route, the Mediterranean trade routes, the Trans-Saharan trade routes, and the Silk Roads. Those are the 4 that we're talking about here today. Now, the Indian Ocean trade routes. So they're characterized by the presence of seasonal monsoon winds. And so we see seasonal monsoon winds kind of around where the ships are, or the coast of East Africa, and they heavily interfere with trade along this route. And these are monsoon winds which cause storms and things like that. So they kind of hindered the growth of commercial practices during this period, but also they created a need for merchants to reside in port cities for long periods of time. And what port cities are the places where merchants kind of have inns. They stay there for almost 6 months, I think, 4 to 6 months. And so they kind of have a lot of cultural diffusion. They're very culturally inclusive, religiously inclusive. And the Indian Ocean trade route facilitated cultural diffusion for centuries. It was a very, very influential trade route for a long period of time, and it wasn't going to go away anytime soon. And I think from my prior studies, I think the Indian Ocean trade route was the most influential. Yeah, I see it there. So it was the most influential and popular passage of this time. Because again, as you can see here, so many religions, so many technologies, so many periods, so many regions were unified in this place. And again, due to a heavy Eastern or South Asian, Eastern African, Portuguese, and Middle Eastern presence in this region, the Indian Ocean trade route was the most influential and popular passage of this time. So if you get a question, I'm talking about the Indian Ocean trade route, think of this vast, vast place where cultural diffusion occurred, which had monsoon winds and port cities. So again, we have the Middle East, India, and the Carolinas, or not the Carolinas, sorry, Indiana, not Indiana, I'm thinking of the U.S. right now. I'm in AP U.S. history. We have India, and then we have China and the East Asian region. And we also have East Africa and some of the religions that were transported along this route. Again, you can see from my blue drawings, it was a lot. It was a very complex route. We have Islam from the Middle East and the Eastern African realm. So Islam was very, very influential into sub-Saharan Africa through the Trans-Saharan trade route we'll talk about next, and the Middle East. So this transported heavily along this route by the reign of the Abbasids and the Umayyad Caliphate. We also have Christianity coming from the Mediterranean. Again, the Mediterraneans traded, the Europeans traded on this route. And we also have Hinduism coming from India and Sri Lanka. We have Hinduism very, very making an influence on this route, even though not as much, because Hinduism was more of a cult. Talking about cults, Hinduism wasn't really a universalizing religion as were Islam and Christianity. And we also see Buddhism, which is also more of an universalizing religion. And so Buddhism kind of traveled during this route, and was also very, very influential. And we see the junks. We see right next to that ship, the European ship on the left. The rightmost ship was called a junk, and we're talking about these big, bulky ships, which were also efficient and fast. Quick question: can anybody name that European ship to the left of the junk, the one with the little crosses on it per se? And this is a term you definitely need to know for AP World History Modern. It appeared in the exam for me last year, so hint, hint, it's important. A C. It starts with a C. And it has 3 masts. It's characterized for its 3 masts. And these are all Latin sails I was talking about earlier. These control-giving sails. Nope, it's not a crusade. A crusade were the things that happened during this period also. I'm glad you mentioned it. Crusades happened when the Islamic people were fighting against the Christian people for control of Jerusalem. Yeah, and that the Holy Lands, basically. But yeah, that also fueled cultural diffusion. Just a side topic here, cultural diffusion happened because of this wars, these crusades, because the Europeans became very enamored of the Islamic things. So it's a good try. It's a very good try. But these actually are called 3-masted caravels, and it's definitely something to know for AP World History. They have 3 masts. They're all Latin sails, which allow for control along these routes. And these are the swift ships. They're light, they're swift, and they're the optimal thing for trade along the Indian Ocean trade routes and under the other maritime trade routes during this period, including the Mediterranean trade routes. So 3-masted caravels, remember that term. And thank you for trying, Ali. I appreciate that very, very much. So the Indian Ocean trade routes. Okay, so Eric Beckman, again, very good point. I will have in-depth live reviews of these routes, starting with the Trans-Saharan on Monday. Again, he put a link to that. I also have a link in the call to action, I believe. Let me check one more time. Yes, it is there. So, I mean, if you want to view that really quick, go ahead and do that. But yeah, definitely sign up for that after the stream to get a more, a very, very in-depth overview of this. So, the Indian Ocean trade route was also idealized as a prime-time maritime trading center and hosted the transfusion of heavy items such as timber, ivory, spices, and cotton textiles. Again, remember when we use ships, it's mostly to transport heavy items, and when we use like land travel, it's mostly to transport light and valuable items. So these maritime trading routes, like the Indian Ocean trade route, is really used to transpose heavy items. Timber, ivory, spices, and cotton textiles. As important spices were traded through the Strait of Malacca, the city of Srivijaya, the Srivijaya Empire on the Malay Peninsula thrived on this lucrative trade, spreading Buddhism along the way. So again, you guys definitely learn about the Srivijaya Empire because I know it's on your key concept lists. So definitely know that the Srivijaya Empire was gaining some spices, some money, and some power over trade because of this. And they also spread Buddhism, as we can see. So the Trans-Saharan trade route. The Trans-Saharan trade route, which really hit its peak during this period, as although the peak wasn't very high for them. I mean, obviously compared to the Indian Ocean trade route, as you can see, they don't have much to cover, and they were located in the northeastern sector of Africa. During the early Umayyad Caliphate, which was the first Islamic caliphate, which formed under the split between Shia and Sunni Islam, Islam was brought to this trade route, rapidly spreading across Africa and unifying kingdoms under one true crown. Again, we're seeing merchants come from Middle East to Northern Africa, the city-state of Carthage, things like that. And because of this, they came down. I mean, they came to sub-Saharan Africa, and they unified all these kingdoms under one true crown. And I think Ali said, wait, can you go back to the previous slide? Okay, got it. I'll go back for that for you. So caravan crossings across the Saharan Desert. What were caravan crossings, first of all? So when you're transporting across from North Africa to sub-Saharan Africa, it's a very, very harsh climate. No, that's a harsh climate across this region, this middle region called the Saharan Desert, near Mogadishu, if you can see that little squiggly line. So that Saharan Desert in the middle of Africa, it was a very hostile region. And so they use these things called camel caravans, where people would really get on camels, ride these camels across this trade route for kind of cheap and efficient transport across this trade route, and they carried all their goods. But what it did is it led to an overall increase in the number of slaves, gold ingots and ivory pieces being brought to the Middle East. And these were their ships. I mean, we're talking about things going from place to place. They transport things through these camel caravans. So no camel caravans as a term. It's very, very important. We're talking about the Trans-Saharan trade route. I'm sure Mr. Diorca will talk to you guys about it in a stream on the 29th. Okay, and I'll go back for 1 second. We'll talk about Islam. So Islam was very, very influential once again. It came from the Middle East to northeastern Africa, and it went downwards and westwards. It spread really everywhere. And some things that were traded on this route were salt. Salt was the thing that European traders came to sub-Saharan Africa for. So SALT, remember, salt. We also have weapons like swords, especially. We have ivory transported along this trade route. So it's a lot of things that are transported and very, very influential things. And Ali, I'll go back for you to the previous slide. And then do you want the slide before this or just this one? Okay, got it. And also, I will have a link to the slideshow if y'all want in the call to action. All right, let me do that real quick. It should be here, but I'll add it just in case. Slideshow. All right. Let me get a share link for y'all. All right. Okay. So if you click that link, you should have the slideshow for your viewing. So definitely go look at that. I mean, if you can't take pictures of it, go look at that. All right. Here we go. All right. I'm gonna get back to my slide right here. All right, so slide 2 on the Trans-Saharan trade route. So first of all, due to the rough terrain of Saharan deserts, again, we're talking about camel caravans became widespread. And this led to the institution of things called Caravanserai. And I don't want you to mix this up with camel caravans, because that's what I did. And they're not really camel caravans. They're actually they're like ancient inns for traveling merchants. And if you can see, there's a little picture of this. They're kind of like little ancient inns. They really are. And this shows like a little big inn where people can rent rooms out. They can stay there for a few weeks, a few days. They're not as big as trading port cities where people actually live for 6 months or so, but they are places where they could stay. They could rent another camel caravan. Think about you going across this place. Think about you traveling by camel, staying in one of these caravanserais, calling up a camel, or going outside, getting a camel caravan, and then going from place to place to place. And know that caravanserai were places for cultural diffusion and cultural interaction, because people from all places of the world came to these camel caravans. The Mediterranean trade route. So the fall of the Roman Empire, which again heavily supported this trade route, led to its overall decline during this period. Because again, we're talking about the Western Europe and the Eastern European region. The Mediterranean trade routes were the center of this region. So the fall of the Roman Empire led to its overall decline. However, under the steady growth of the Byzantine Empire, which if you didn't know, actually formed as a result of the resurgence of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Islamic culture, which was supported by the Umayyads and Abbasid Empire, supported its comeback. So again, the Byzantines, the Umayyads, and the Abbasids supported the comeback of the Mediterranean trade routes. As it did elsewhere, Islam's high regard for merchants and support for the merchant class helped spur mercantile development in the area, led by the Islamic cities of Cairo and Alexandria, and the Christian cities of Constantinople and Venice. So again, Muhammad was a merchant, and that's a great way to remember how the Islamic, they had Sharia law, which is kind of a law code, a religious law code, which kind of have held merchants very, very high on this kind of this trajectory, this hierarchy of people. The Byzantine Empire. I'll repeat that one more time as Ali stated. Again, we're talking about Islam's high regard for merchants. Remember the Islamic cities of Cairo and Alexandria and Constantinople and Venice were huge trade cities. So the Byzantine Empire was formed as a result of the Western Roman Empire. Again, it fell apart, but the Eastern Roman Empire was salvaged. And so it wasn't really demolished by the Ostrogoths or Visigoths. And so this Eastern Roman Empire really began to form on its own. And it spurred away from the Roman Catholic Church and established its own practices of Orthodox Christianity. And so this Eastern Roman Empire was known as the Byzantine Empire, obviously, and it was a huge trading empire. We also see the formation of a legal code under the Emperor Justinian. We see very, very distinct practices with regards to religion, but culture was the same. I mean, the Eastern Roman Empire, you can think of it as just like a subjectory, a subsidiary of the Eastern Roman Empire. And it was very, very Greek. It wasn't that Roman, but it was very, very Greek. And so because of their disattachment with the Roman Catholic Church, they stood strong for many, many years until their fall in, I believe, 1453, if I'm not mistaken. But yes. We also see, again, as I'm talking about, Constantinople and Venice became huge centers for trade. Venice, I know that was the birthplace of Marco Polo. He was a great trader in the Christian realm. And then Cairo and Alexandria, they converted to Islamic city-states during this period. The Silk Roads. This is probably the most influential, other than the Indian Ocean trade route, during this period. So definitely know these Silk Roads. In parallel with the Mediterranean trade route, the Silk Roads declined after the fall of major empires in Rome, India, and China. Again, this trade route back here, they declined after the fall of the Roman Empire. I forgot to mention about this trade route. They traded yarn, grapes, and olive oil. To be concise, that's the three things they traded most on this trade route. Was a maritime trade route. Again, we're talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, how it contributed to the decline of the Silk Roads. However, this is a huge, huge comeback after this initial decline, because under the beneficial and forthcoming legal codes of the Abbasid Caliphate, which is Sharia law, and the Mongols, the Yasa law, they too resurged. And what to know about the Sharia law and Yasa law was they really, really valued merchants, and they allowed for the free travel and the safe travel of merchants across places like the Silk Roads, and especially across places like the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads remained a major avenue for the long-term trade of culture and less bulky goods and disease, emerging as a power player during the Pax Mongolica. And if you didn't know, the Pax Mongolica is something that occurs during this period, and it is a major period of Mongol peace and Mongol prosperity. It's very, very important. We see this Silk Roads go through Europe and the Middle East, South Asia. We see it go through East Asia and East Africa. So it's kind of everywhere during this period. It's bigger than the Indian Ocean trading routes, but it's an overland route. Know that. It passes through many of these gunpowder, these land empires. We see Christianity start to come in and encroach upon the people on this trading route across the Mediterranean boundaries. We see Islam come from the Middle East and North Africa. We see Hinduism come from South Asia, Buddhism from the same place, and also East Asia. And we see this little drawing of something called animism come from the Mid-Oceania and some other places in Asia. And so animism was really a practice that went against traditional forms of religion. And animism was a practice that really revered nature, revered culture, and revered the practice, the reveration of the sun, the sun gods that came from Japan. That's what everything that came during this route. Again, remember that Christianity and Islam were the most frequently spread, along with Buddhism. On this route, we see the transfusion of gold, silver. We see culture being transfused. We see porcelain being transfused along this route. And we also see silk, again, scarves, clothes, things like that along this trade route. Very, very valuable things. Again, porcelain and silk were things that rulers look for, that lords look for. The Silk Roads, under the influential jurisdiction of Genghis Khan and his successor, Kublai Khan, the Silk Roads flourished, and trade was heavily bolstered by an effective YAM system of communication, extensive trade, resettlement, and regulations to prevent piracy and theft along this route. So again, the Mongol Khanates really form a dominion over this trade route and ensure the safety of anybody who traveled on it. During this period, we see the influence of the Silk Roads because of this. Under the YAM system of communication, where in Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, anybody can really talk to people along this route and regulate trade. They flourished. There was extensive trading posts. What I mean by resettlement is they would literally force people, pick them up, and force them to man posts to protect this trade route. And we have regulations to prevent piracy, which was a huge issue when we're talking about these Silk Roads. All right. So she said, what are the main things that they sold in the Mediterranean trade route? Yes, I did go through this really, really, really fast. I will go back. I apologize for that. So as you can see here, you see grapes being transported. These are kind of the main things that they traded. Yarn, and they also traded things like olive oil. But definitely remember, these examples definitely won't appear on the AP examination, or probably not your unit tests. But definitely remember olive oil for one, and also remember that they traded bulk goods along big bulky goods along maritime trade routes. Land trade routes were characterized by the trade of precious and small and lightweight goods, but the maritime trade routes were classified really by the transport of these bulky, these heavy, these really, really big goods. So if you can remember that, you probably get the answer to this. You don't need to know the specifics of it. These are just some great examples. Again, the Mediterranean, for sure. Your class should have gone over that. The Mediterranean trade routes, I remember in the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, during the classical period, and the Byzantine Empire, these Alps mountains, they really had a fruitful harvest of olive oil, the lands under the Alps mountains. Just some extra points. Oh, here we go. So long-standing impacts. During the commercial period, all these advances, we talked about the astrolabe, the compass, again, we talked about paper making, currency. They spurred commercial advances, and they also spurred the age of exploration later on. Because we're thinking about commercial voyages by Christopher Columbus, voyages by Ibn Battuta, even voyages by people like Rene Descartes. I mean, these were really spurred during the age of exploration by these commercial advances. And again, like Ali was talking about, I love your participation here. The Crusades really spurred the age of exploration as well during this period, because the Crusades, they led to religious transfusion, cultural transfusion, because the Christians were coming in to Islamic land. They were gaining things like knowledge of many, many, many technologies. So it spurred the age of exploration, this whole period as a whole. I was talking about cultural transfusion. We see the spread of Islam, Christianity, many, many things, culture, disease. We see goods, we see technologies, age of exploration. Again, age of exploration is after this period. It's during I'd characterize the age of exploration after 1450 CE. We also see the spread of the Black Death during this period, and because of this, they had a deficiency in the overall workers provided, and so the workers that were there, they demanded more money, and so because of this, there was an overall decline in feudalism. Because when you see workers that were primarily working for free during this period, they were indentured servants and things like that, they moved up in the class ranks. They began to demand money. They began to demand good money. So these farmers began to privatize, and this results in the end of feudalism and the rise of the age of exploration. So everything that occurred during this period ties into the age of exploration. Remember the Black Death. They might ask you this question: what did the Black Death push forth? It was the age of exploration. It was the end of feudalism. The Black Death was majorly influential during this period, because it really, really dimmed out the population of Europe and the Middle Ages as a whole. So that's kind of the main takeaways of long-standing impacts of the commercial periods. I know I went through this fast, so any questions, any slides you want me to go back, anything you want me to explain once more, feel free to ask me. And again, I do weekly study streams. I think I'm doing one in a few weeks, so I'll let y'all know. Definitely go ahead and ask me these questions, because I'm a great resource. I took the course. I took 2 examinations in world history. So ask me about my experiences. Ask me about questions in world history. Yeah, anybody in the chat, go ahead. I'll be on here for a few more minutes, assuming no more questions. Oh, so what am I supposed to expect when taking the AP examination? So, I mean, that's kind of there's a lot to that question. Definitely, for one thing, expect stimulus-based questions, and don't expect anything blank. So expect to kind of have to read between the lines, expect to kind of have to read the excerpt, and to kind of take information from the excerpt. So the examination it's not a very hard examination if you know how to take it. What I mean by that is you have to know how to take these questions and take them very, very seriously. So does your class, by any chance, take stimulus-based exams or unit tests? So how are your exams? Are your test-based? Are they multiple choice with stimulus? Okay, so are these tests, like, do they have a paragraph and then a question, or just a question? Because like stimulus is basically like a paragraph or a sentence, a quote, something like that, or a picture. You have that. Okay, that's great practice. So really capitalize upon that when you're preparing for the AP examination, because Multiple choice. Okay. Yeah. So we have the pictures or paragraphs and then multiple choice questions. And that's exactly how all questions on the AP exam, except for the writing part, are really put together. And a few SAQs. Yeah. So that portion, the multiple choice portion, I would definitely recommend Fiveable streams because that's what I use. And I got a 5 on the AP examination. So definitely utilize our streams. We'll have some coming up in May, some coming up here and there. And YouTube also has some great streams on taking multiple choice questions. But it's really all about practice. I mean, definitely expect some hard questions there. You don't really need to expect to learn everything, but I would really recommend to, again, we're talking about this period, characterize this period by some key points. And don't try to memorize everything. Memorize some key points about this period, and that will really help you, especially even on unit exams. You can read the passages and not know anything, not know everything that is, and know some key details and get the answer. So the AP exam isn't hard if you know how to take the exam. That's the simple portion. And also we have some SAQs, LEQs, and DBQs. And especially to me, I don't know what kind of person you are when it deals with test taking, but this is the easy part for myself. So it's really about how if you can get a perfect score on all of these topics just by knowing how to write the SAQs, LEQs, and DBQs. So definitely view our streams on the LEQs, DBQs, SAQs. I would recommend Steve Heimler, Heimler's History on YouTube. He's great with these LEQs, SAQs, DBQs. That's what I used. So definitely expect some of those. Expect stimulus-based questions. What portion did I start with? So AP World History last year for me wasn't AP World History Modern. I actually started with the Unit 1, which is 8,000 BC to 600 BCE. But with regards to my studying last year, I started with the first period because it was, it wasn't weighted as much. And I think that was a mistake on my part. Because when you go through the course percentages, I'll pull up that for AP World History Modern. You want to kind of focus on the percentages from that are most important during this period. Give me 1 minute. Let me pull it up. What I mean by percentages, I'll show you in a minute. Here we go. History Modern. All right, here we go. I'll put this up on my screen for y'all to view. All right. It's not a very good image, but we'll work with it here. All right. Here we go. All right, so Unit 1 is the global tapestry. Sorry for the very bad image again. That's 8 to 10%. But again, I would really focus when I really start my studying around Unit 3, Unit 4, Unit 5, and Unit 6. So again, I see those are the most heavily weighted periods of time. So focus from 1450 to 1900 CE, because those are going to appear on the exam. Not much more, but it's going to appear significantly more than the other periods. So when we're talking about starting on the AP examination, start with this part. Yes, well, to put it short, my exam was, if that makes any sense. I have no idea how the exam is going to be doing this year because they don't give us that information. But I know from people who've taken the exam and I myself from last year, they do put it in order. Because, I mean, they had a prompt from 8,000 BCE as the first question in the AP exam last year. So for me, especially, I don't know if it was a test form or something, but it was all relatively in the same order. And that's usually what they do to kind of make it easier for y'all. But yeah, I would review from 1450 to 1900 first around, and I would start studying around like end of March, middle March, early March if possible. But start early, start reviewing these different time periods. And then I would say briefly review the global tapestry networks of exchange. I mean, not too briefly, but review it as much as you need to. Go ahead and review these other concepts. But the AP exam is very easy if you know how to take it, if you've studied enough. Okay, DBQ, SAQ, LEQ, or MCs. First, let me think. That might take a little digging. Yeah, I started with the DBQ. Because that was the most daunting task to me. And I decided to start with the most daunting thing and the most weighted thing. Because again, the DBQ, even this year, it's weighted the most out of any of the short answer or the FRQs free response questions. So definitely, I would recommend focusing on the DBQ first, especially if you don't have enough time to review the other concepts. But review that first, master that, because that's so much of the exam. I'm going to search up how much the DBQ percentage, AP World Modern. It's a lot. I know that for a fact. Yeah, the DBQ is 25% of your exam score. So definitely focus on that. That's one DBQ. That's not a few SAQs. That's one DBQ. And your multiple choice is 40% of your exam score. So I would really say to work on this DBQ, to work on these questions like that. And the second thing I did was the SAQs. I mean, that's also very, very important in this period. I would recommend working on that as well. And then LEQs are only 15% of the examination. I would not neglect it whatsoever, but I would definitely focus on that as your later priority. And so my order was DBQs, SAQs, LEQs, and MCQs. Because MCQs, I felt like I was kind of familiar with because my class went over MCQs all the time. My teacher went over it all the time. And we took tests with stimulus-based multiple choice questions. So I think that was my biggest mistake, not really viewing the MCQs as much, because I feel like I could have gained some extra points, some easy points there. So any more questions about studying, concepts, taking notes in class? I have some great examples of notes to show you guys if you need any. What were my study habits? So I had a kind of I grinded last year to be honest. I mean, I started studying for the AP examination in March, and that's pretty early for most people, but it helped me out. And that was the most influential part of my study habits, to be frank. It's starting early, getting a head start, even on unit tests, starting 1 week early, not cramming the night before. That was my method. And also, I would use as many resources as possible when I was preparing for world history. Let me pull up my past stream on AP World Resources. But yeah, I would really, really grind. I would use third-party resources. Here we go. Yep, 1 second. And this is a bunch of helpful information on study topics as well. So I even have a breakdown of this here. Okay, here. Here's all of the things I used, me myself, for third-party resources. I used Heimler's history for LEQs, SAQs, DBQs. Then I used Adam Norris's YouTube channel for all of this. And then I used Freemanpedia for many of these things. And these are really, really helpful resources. And I would recommend using them in conjunction with your textbooks and things like that. Also use Fiveable. Fiveable is the most influential resource I used last year because I learned from as much from Fiveable as I did from my class. So it was a very, very supplementary and complementary resource. I would also recommend, here's a learning spectrum that we detailed on here. Third-party resources are like 9.5%. Assigned reading, doing that is like 40%. Review sessions are like 20%. And then in-class lectures are like 30%. So focus in class. Be engaged in class. And I'm glad the Fiveable is helping you a lot. I hope I helped you today. But yeah, be engaged in class. Ask questions. Don't be afraid. Be a good learner. And I know you are a good learner because you've been asking so many questions to me here today. But definitely keep doing that. Keep grinding for that. And don't get distracted. I mean, the thing about world history is you need to commit your time to it. It takes a long time. But when you go into college, going into applying for college, using this course is very, very influential because it's a hard course. It's not an easy course to take. It's not an easy course to learn. And it gives you so much background knowledge. So investing that time, investing that study habits. One thing I do is I don't touch my phone for the first 3 hours when I come home. I don't touch it. I don't look at it. So I'm off of my phone, completely off. So I'm focusing especially on this AP class. And I suppose you are what grade are you in right now? Freshman. Okay, so this is your first AP class. I would really recommend setting that precedent, setting that strong AP World History study habits. And I think you will succeed. I mean, if you spend the time, you don't get distracted, you take good notes, to take good paper notes, and be engaged in the classroom, there's no way you won't get 5. And yeah, any resources helping with the AP examination, feel free to ask me about it. I really know what's good for that, especially in regards to textbooks. So, all right. Okay, so is that the last question we have here? Um, any more? Let me know. I'll be here for a few seconds. All right. I hope I helped you guys with AP World History. One more thing to say, I will move over to my PowerPoint for this one, because I need to plug Fiveable. Here we go. Innovations. I'm gonna give a quick plug to Fiveable here today. This helped me so much. I know it's helping Ali so much. It's gonna help all of you in AP World History. So any AP subject, we have most of them in here. Follow us on our Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I mean, we're everywhere. I mean, we really, really are like to project ourselves over multiple platforms. Follow our Twitter, follow our Instagram, and follow our YouTube to view some of those snippets of our replays, to sign up for Fiveable Plus, and visit our website at fiveable.me for more information. And Ali says, one more question. When you finished your exam, did you have a lot of time left? So I actually, for the multiple choice questions, I had no time left over. Like, I didn't even check my answers. This test is a fast test. I mean, you have to read these questions, then answer the multiple choice questions. So especially like these aren't very easy questions to comprehend, and these prompts aren't very easy questions to comprehend either. So when you have these big paragraph stimulus, it's not very easy to finish first, finish before the time ends. I think I had like 3 or 4 minutes, so I was freaking out by the end of the test. But hey, I got a 5. You need to look at your questions very, very clearly, and don't freak out if you don't have time left. I mean, it's okay as long as you did your best. You spent as much time as you could on each question, not as much, not too much, obviously, but like spent the time that you needed. And where do I find the link for the slides they use in the stream? I think there's a little button on the bottom which says Stream Slideshow. Do you see that, or am I mistaken? No? Okay. Let me just put it in here for. Sorry, that was. I guess it's just not working out here. Oh, here it is. All right, I put it on there. It says Stream Slideshow. You should be able to see it. The big green button. Yep. And you also said, what score did you get? I got a 5 on the AP exam. I also got a 790 out of 800 on the SAT subject test in world history. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty successful in this course at least. So yeah. All right. So if that's it, I'll close up the stream. Thank you for joining. And again, we have a new thing called MVPs in Fiveable. Ali, I really liked your interactivity in this session. I'll recommend you as an MVP. And as an MVP, what that means is you'll get a bag with Fiveable swag, Fiveable merch. So yeah, I'll definitely recommend you. You might get an email from Fiveable in a few days saying that you won this swag bag. So it has like a T-shirt, a couple of pins, something like that. So this is a gift of appreciation for your interactivity. All right, thank you for joining. I'll go ahead and end the podcast. And definitely go ahead and view our stream on the 29th with Don Diorto on the Trans-Saharan trade routes.